The meeting is called to order. We have a full complement of board members, so I won't designate you tonight. All seven are here. We have a single application before us. That's the Morash application having to do with the demolition of an existing non-conforming structure and replacement with a new structure. And as all of you know, this property was the subject of an earlier application. There was a proposal for a replacement structure. So there is some history behind this. This proposal, the details of this proposal are somewhat different than the proposal that came before us initially. But the overall regulatory construct is the same. And I think some of the issues that we need to delve into are the same as those that we discussed before. But again, the details of this proposal are a bit different than what we saw earlier. Generally speaking, I just wanted to briefly remind everyone of the LUO standards that are at play here, because they are important to the details of this proposal, particularly the dimensional and the dimensions and the distances from the setbacks are particularly important when you're looking at those standards in the ordinance. So on page 8 of the ordinance, we're looking at the nonconformance chapter. On page 8, section 4B discusses reconstruction or replacement. So that is relevant here. And portions of this I would highlight for you. It talks about structures not being reconstructed or replaced to increase their nonconformity. And it also talks about replacement structure shall not be any larger than the original structure, except as allowed pursuant to 4G, which is a section that deals with expansions of nonconforming structures. And there are some constraints around those expansions. So that's a relevant piece as well. And 4G is found beginning on page 10. The other piece I'd point out to you quickly before we get started with this is 4E3, which is also relevant to this proposal. And this talks about the total footprint of the original structure, if it can be relocated or replaced beyond the required water body setback, then no portion of the structure will be less than the setback. So the first step in this process, and this is a point that we had discussed when we talked about the earlier application, the first step in this process is determining if the existing structure could be moved to meet the water setback requirements. That's 100 feet or more. And so that is the first piece that needs to be addressed. And then after that, we talk about relocation to the greatest practical extent. So that section kicks in as well, which we've talked about with a lot of these shoreline applications. So we can get back into the details of that as we move through this, but I just wanted to generally point those pieces out for everyone before we get started. So what I'd like to do is we need to hear from the applicant. I think we need some clarity on several different issues. I know I have a few questions, and I expect that a number of you also have questions about this. And clearly there won't be a decision tonight. Our process is first to look at the application, determine if it's complete, and we will need to decide if we have the information we need to move forward, or if there are additional pieces we need, or other things that are necessary before we can move forward with it. So with that, unless there are any general questions about process or moving forward, I'd ask the applicant to come up and to present the proposal for us, if you would.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out here on a November night. I'm John Carr. I've been friends with the Morashes for 40 years. I'm not a paid consultant or engineer or anything like that. I come from a place, Lake George, New York, similar to your community. It's on a lake, lots of zoning laws, lots of stuff going on. So I kind of understand. I have been with planning board members, so I sort of I get how much you guys get paid to come out every couple of nights a month. So for what it's worth, I'm getting paid about the same. So I was not part of any of the original applications that Scott and Dawn submitted. I kind of got brought into the equation after the denial. More of a, hey, John, what do you think of this? And I gotta be honest, I don't disagree with your findings. Jack, you made a comment about the size of the house being 4,600 square feet on a half-acre lot. I don't disagree with you. That's a big house. There were comments about trees and moving roads, and power lines getting moved. It's a half-acre lot. It's not very big. I think, the findings of the board finally, with the denial letter were probably well-written and probably legally necessary. I think there would have been a lot of question about the justification for more than doubling the size of what the existing house was. So I don't disagree with where you guys ended up with that. I think you gave it a fair opportunity to work with it. The good part with that process for me coming in after the fact, and the fact that you guys take good minutes and you have Zoom meetings online, and I could kind of look and see where you guys were coming from and where the questions were before I got here tonight. That's kind of a unique opportunity. Most applications, you submit them and you kind of start from zero. The interesting part for me is, I'm in the Adirondack Park in upstate New York. Lake George is heavily regulated lake. Chip and I talked about that over the summer. But it's a different code, and
recording in progress.
some of the stuff some of it is the vocabulary and terminology, like greatest extent practical. I gotta admit, there's one case in the state of Maine that went to court. It really didn't shed any light on this. There's not any guidance from the state on what it is. I gotta tell you, if I were a board member, it'd be a really tough thing to figure out, what is that mean? It's not purely environmental, it's not purely financial, it's kind of this weird thing. What I did find interesting is that it does give the board a lot of local control over what projects are there and how you go about it. In the code that you use and, that you've adopted from the state, it looks to me like there's incentives to keep moving back. The further back you go, the more you can do. You move back 50 feet and the basement doesn't count as square footage. Well, why would that even be in there? If it's 100 feet of the highway kind of thing. Well, it's there to encourage people to move back that far. Hey, you move back 100 feet and, as Chip said, you can do a lot of stuff back there. And I totally get that. To be honest, when I started looking at, what are the options here? What is the best approach to this? And again, I built a bunch of stuff and sometimes it just doesn't make sense. I talk to developers and they want to put all these roads in everywhere. Well, look at the price of a road. Is it even worth doing that? So what's practical here? Basically I kind of divided it into three different ideas. And again, like you said tonight, I'm not looking for approvals tonight or to the next meeting or the meeting after that, and probably next spring. you know, when you guys get sick and tired of hearing from me, and we'll either not come back or you'll kick us out, but, you know, just to feel out what are the options and what is best, and what does meet your codes as practical. You know, Plan A, and I'm giving them definitions just so we can refer to them. Plan A is the Morashes keep what they have. If that house wasn't there currently, this application would be vastly different. It would be 100 feet back or the highway, because that's all you got to work with. They do have a roughly 2,000 square foot house that's 14 feet from the water. It's an older house, but it's 14 feet from the water, which has a great deal of value to it. House needs work, needs to be fixed up. Unfortunately, that house is in the floodplain. That's a problem. You know, I believe Readfield, you know, adopted floodplain regulations that do cover types of foundations, how they're constructed and things like that. There would be things that would need to be looked at. I haven't delved into it too hard, but, you know, that would be a conversation that I have, you know, with the, you know, CEO, and we go over it. There are advantages to the Morashes. They save a tremendous amount of money, and they're 14 feet from the lake, and that's a pretty nice place to be. A lot less headaches. Plan B is basically a plan that I think personally I like. Does it meet every code in the book? Probably not. Is it the least intrusive? Is it the most conservative? Yes. It meets every setback required except for one. And we'll get to that, and that's a problem, you know, so what is, and then I think when we look at, you know, the reconstruction codes, you know, we get into, you know, that section that you referenced, which, you know, is 14E, and I'll get to that in a minute. Moving the house back to the 50-foot mark does not require moving utilities, power lines that cross the property. They're not Scott's property or power lines, they go to the neighbors' houses. And the further back we go on that hill, the steeper it gets. You know, that steepness does become a problem. It does have a negative effect. The trees that are in that area that would need to be cleared, you know, they do serve a function. Not just environmentally, but the character of that neighborhood to both houses and the driveway. You know, clearing up big, you know, blast of old growth trees does change the character of that area. And also, quite honestly, it's within the 250-foot, you know, lake, the sensitive lake area. So why are we clearing trees if we don't have to do that? You know, that's a thing. You know, it's not increasing the height, it's not increasing the side yard setbacks, it's not increasing the square footage. Their current house is a 3-bedroom house. They'd end up with a 3-bedroom house. But it's a new structure. You know, what's good for everybody, I think in a win-win is there's a new septic, there's stormwater, there's phosphorus calculations, there's all the things that are really good when people redevelop. And there are advantages to redevelopment, even if it's not perfect. It's sometimes better to do it than not do it. I think that's why the code is trying to encourage people, you know, to keep going further back. Further back you go, the more you get. You know, and I can understand that as I look at their code. Plan C is kind of what you saw before, but we move it back, we clear all the trees. We've got a driveway that's probably a 13% slope coming down off a steep road. We cleared a lot of trees, we changed the character of that neighborhood. You know, yeah, can it be 4,600 square feet? Yeah, it can. I think that's a pretty darn big house for there. I'm not a big fan of that, personally. I think that's pretty high impact development on a very small lot, very close to the lake on a steep hill. That's my personal belief. But again, I'm not the applicant. I'm just a friend of Scott's telling what I think, and that's, you know, I drove 7 hours here to kind of pick your brains and see what is the best approach to this. So with that, you know, you've got Plan B, as I call it right there. And looking at that, and a lot of that is developed out of questions, comments, review of the regulations, conversations with Chip. You know, and during the different meetings that had happened, you know, there were questions. I think Jack did a lot of questions about what do the codes allow for clearing trees. Well, geez, if I can avoid clearing any trees and move a house to a cleared area that's already cleared, that's flat, that's a pretty cool thing to do. And especially if I'm not increasing the non-conformity of that parcel. I think when you look, there were conversations regarding like the Fisk house that is currently under construction. One of the comments from the town lawyer was it cannot increase non-conformity. And I think Plan B does not do that. If anything, it's increasing the conformity of the lot, of the house, not perfect, but it's increasing it substantially. And to be honest with you, Morashes are giving something up for that. Waking up and having your coffee 14 feet from the lake is pretty cool. 50 feet, it's still pretty cool, but maybe not as cool. So, they are giving something up to do that. Now you might say, well, why don't they just go to 75 or 100? Okay, I gotta clear all those trees. I gotta, open that up. We've gotta put in a new driveway. I've gotta move utilities, and I'm still, and Jack, you brought up a good point. If he does move back, the new code allows for a 50% reduction of other setbacks. And that's a good point, and I thought about that quite a bit. The issue is, well, if I'm gonna do that, is one of these, relaxing that side yard setback versus relaxing the waterfront setback. Was one better than another? Normally, you would say a side yard setback is better than a lake setback, and I would agree with that, except for the fact that now the house is on a 12-degree slope hill, and I've just cleared most of this lot to do that. Now, yeah, I can come back in and plant trees around and try to figure it out, but having these upland forested areas are pretty critical. I'm also, by doing Plan B, versus, taking advantage of that new modification to your code, which I think makes sense, I'm not impacting anybody. When you come down that road, it still is gonna look pretty much identical to the way it looks now. The neighbors that are to the side of them, the abutters, when I do move it back into that triangle, their house is lined right up, looking right straight at this Plan C house. And it's a big house. And, that's not advantageous for them. In speaking to the neighbors, I believe there were some letters that were written in, I'm not sure who the folks are. But when you do look at what is currently there with Plan A, to be honest, a new house that's compliant with code, that looks nice, is probably gonna add value to the two neighbors. And that's something I think is important here, to maintain that, because those lots are, Scott does have a small half-acre lot. Those neighbors do look at his house when they either drive by or sit on their front porches also. So I think that's kind of important. While I'm cranking away here, I did want to kind of go through, greatest extent practical, and I hate to say it, I just couldn't find a lot of great guidance on that. I kind of pity you guys for having to figure this out every application that comes forward. But before I kind of go through that, is there any questions that, relating to what I've kind of talked about so far? And again, this is a sketch plan meeting. I'm not looking for approvals. I'm just trying to feel this out, guys. They want to live here year round. I think that 50-year-old house is probably that they currently have it's gonna take some effort to make it comfortable. What I've kind of put together with the Plan B house is something they could live in when they're 80 years old, which I think is kind of their intent. Again, I think it's the best, lowest impact development that we can do on that site. Getting it to meet your code, square peg has to go in a square hole, so that's kind of what I'm trying to feel out. But questions for you guys, you've had a chance to listen to me for a few minutes and kind of look this application over, and I'm sure a few of you, when you opened your packet, thought, oh my God, these guys can't be so, but hopefully we can come to get something that kind of works for everybody, overall.
I just want to make sure I understand what you're putting on the table currently. You have plans A, B, and C that you outlined.
Yeah.
B is what's in the application before us.
Yep.
C is back to the 4,600 square foot house.
Is
that what you're suggesting?
That's certainly an option that would exist. I think it could be done. I think it could meet the 100-foot setback. I don't think it's good development. flat out, I'll be very candid with this board. Jack, I agree with you. It's too big for the lot, but if the Morashes are gonna go to all this trouble, that's kind of their dream house. You know, my conversations with them have been, guys, let's get practical. What is, you know, and I'm a big believer in low impact development. How do you develop a house on that site or redevelop the site with as minimal impacts, period, irrelevant of what the code is? I think moving a house back to an area that's already cleared, we're moving, there's so few trees that you're gonna have to come down. I don't think anybody even noticed. We get a new septic, we get a new well, you know, we're reusing the existing driveway. We're adding stormwater to all of this site that's never been there. You know, we're doing all the stuff that is part of what your code wants people to do. And we're not increasing non-conformity, we're increasing the conformity to quite a bit more than what's there now. And I think that's an important thing. At the same time, you know, adding value to, you know, the neighbors' houses, because it's, you know, it's not a 50-year-old camp that's sitting there. You know, it's a newer house, it's big construction, it's newly built. And I think it's not perfect, but I think it's a lot better than A or C. I think C is a big house, it's their dream house.
Given that, I mean, the standard is in fact 100 feet.
Yeah.
That's the setback, that's the required setback. So given that that is the standard, why wouldn't Plan C be a smaller house than 4,600 that meets the 100-foot setback?
Because if they're gonna go do all of this, that's the house they want. I think it's a big house, personally. You know, I don't disagree with the board that it is big for a half-acre lot. Are they entitled to that? If it can split, if that pig can fit in that hole, yes. But it's still a big house. I think it's destructive to the lot. I think it's destructive to, you know, the character of that neighborhood when you clear that many trees. And I get it, we replant trees and bushes and rain gardens and make things look pretty. But we're talking about taking down an old growth forest area right along a roadside. And then we're talking about building a house on a, you know, 12-degree slope at least, and a driveway coming right down into it off a steep road and a steep driveway. I don't think it's a great plan. I think it can be done. I think we can make that peg fit in the hole. I don't think it's good development. That's my personal feeling on it. Again, I'm not getting paid by the Morashes. This is my 2 cents. This is what I told them I think is reasonable. And I was willing to come over and talk to you guys and see, you know, kind of figure out what is a plan that could work here.
Well, I just, the plan before us calls for about a 2,000 square foot new house, correct?
Correct.
So I don't want to delve into hypotheticals at this point.
No, but it's, you know, I'm kind of taking you through the process that I went through to get to this Plan B and why it's here.
No, I appreciate that.
And I
Some
think
of us
that's
were
important.
involved previously and others maybe were not in adjudicating this whole thing. I was on the Board of Appeals at the time, not the planning board, but so,
Yeah.
but
I
I
heard about it.
I've also, we had a site visit, so I'm familiar with the site. Now,
Yeah.
but the plan before us, which at this point we're only reviewing for completeness, but
Yeah.
calls for is it 2,000 square feet or what's the percent? Or can you speak to the specifics, or should I ask Mr. Moore?
Well, yeah, and this is Justin from Main Design Build. I think most of you are familiar with him.
Uh-huh.
Why don't you, do you want to talk about some of the square footages and the calculations and stuff? And then I can address the question of why I think Plan B does, and why it's here, and why it does meet the greatest extent practical, and go through those points that the board considers.
Before Justin comes up, let me put this question out on the table and you can respond to this, but it kind of builds on what Peter was talking about. As I looked at all of this, I looked at the plans, I looked at the, you know, the site plans and the building plans, and they indicate that the proposed structure is considerably larger than the existing. And I also see a discrepancy between two of the plans with regard to what that size actually is. And further, I see a discrepancy with the existing. The existing house shows up as like 1,500 and change in one location and 17 on another plan. So I'm, as I was looking at this, and those numbers, as you know, are important when you're looking at the standards and how the standards apply. So it would be really helpful to know what the reality is and to reconcile those discrepancies that I saw here. In terms of the proposed house, I can be more specific if it's helpful, but in looking at sheet A104, I see a house that is about 2,600 square feet. And on A102, which is, I think, the actual house plan, the total is 29 and change.
So the 26 number will include the basement, 1650.
Yes, what I'm looking at, the basement is 899, the first floor is 1,001, and the second floor is 649, for a total of 2,549, and then you add on a little bit for the exterior stairs, and it comes up to 2,623. But then on the building plan itself, I'm looking at 2,946. So I'm really confused about that.
Great question. And again, my goal with it is if the house is 1,800 square feet, the new house is 1,800.
But that's not what this plan looks like.
No, I'm not, he's the guy with the calculator, not me. But the goal of it is not to increase the nonconformity of any capacity, including the height, the setbacks, the square footage. So we're gonna take a quick peek here at this and make sure that's correct. And again, this is why we do these meetings. So it helps me and Justin to know that. And do you wanna take a minute look at that or?
Yeah, we know the A104 is the most up-to-date plan, 1650 without basement, 2549 with the basement.
2,540, yeah, and the basement, as you know, is included as part of the square footage.
Right, over 6 feet.
Right.
How many square feet is it again? Look, floor
I'm sorry.
area. How much is the floor area for the proposed house?
The floor area. 1,001 for the new build. The floor area.
And
And lot cut is 1,111. Lot coverage, which includes the decks for the existing. And the showing is 1,111.
So what's 1,111?
Page A101, the lot coverage for existing building footprint.
Oh, the lot coverage, okay, that's
Yeah, so
different than what
that's-
we're looking at, the square footage and.
Well, yes, the coverage, I thought you asked lot coverage.
I was asking floor area. I was asking what the total is at all of that.
The basement, first floor, second floor is 2,549, and then you add on a little bit for stairs, so.
Well, if we keep those under 4 feet, they're not.
If you keep them under 4 feet, but you added them in there, if you don't add them in, it's 2,549. Henry,
Including the basement.
yes,
I just wanted to, can I just make a comment?
yes,
Just wanted to thank you for your opening comments. I think they were fairly helpful and productive, to be honest.
Thank you. I sat in your seat. It's not always a fun.
I wanted to just sort of also counter that a little bit and say, it's not typical that this board would have, as you know, this board would have more of a speculative discussion, to Peter's point. However, in this case, this is, I don't want the public or you to get the impression that we're sort of against development on this property.
Oh, no, I didn't feel that at all.
You just let me speak. The challenge here is that this lot is a challenging lot to
Yes.
build on. And it doesn't give the Morashes, unfortunately, the right to build exactly probably what they want to build,
Right.
where they want to build it. That is not a problem for the board, that's a problem for the property owner.
Right.
That owns the parcel that they own.
Fully agree.
And we have to apply law and ordinance statute to every application the same way, as you well know.
Oh, yeah.
And we've been asked to basically make an exception to law and to rule in order to, in the last round of this.
Okay, okay.
Here, you're coming to us with a similar, layout, although there's some things here that are different, I would acknowledge, but I would just wanted to make sure that, we can't really act on anything unless we know exactly what the applicant is applying for. But from a philosophical perspective, it's super important that you can't ask the town to be flexible in something the town can't be flexible in.
Oh, I fully agree.
And so that's really the baseline of the discussion. It has to start with that fundamental fact that everything has to be done according to the rule. And so having these speculative discussions to some degree,
I got
as
it.
long
There's
as
a lot of
they-
pages here, I got it.
Right.
You know,
As
here's
long
the
as-
state one, by the
as
way,
long
I got
as
that
they,
one.
as long as they comply,
Yep.
and I think that is, you will have the support of this board, but asking the board to make exceptions to things that it can't change is, easily.
Yes.
Is
you know,
not productive.
I think it's really important that it's understood that, I read through some of the comments that the neighbors have sent in and the Friends of the
Okay.
Moorashes, and that's great, but a couple of them at least talked about, well, this is better. This is better than what there is currently. It's
And that's-
14 feet from the lake, and now it'll be 50 feet from the lake. And yeah, it is better, but it doesn't meet the standard.
Does the square peg fit a square hole? And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And you guys have a legal responsibility to make sure that happens.
Right.
I fully get where you're coming from. I'm not coming in asking for, this isn't a variance request. This is,
Our empathy, and we can be empathetic to the
Yeah.
situation, but
Yeah.
we can't do anything about it if it's
Right.
not allowed.
Yeah. And I think when I read your code, there are provisions within that code that allow this application, Plan B, to come here. The reason I'm spelling out what their options are is, this is why I ended up with this plan. I think it's important to, why did he come in with that plan? Why not come in with the other plan and just move it back? Do that. That meets all the, codes, fine. We could have done that. That certainly would be it. And the key is the square peg fits the square hole. I completely get that. I gotta be honest, when I was on the planning board in Lake George, those friendly New York City people have a lot of lawyers. And I mean, you deal with that constantly. So I get where you're coming from. I'm not asking this board to do anybody a favor. I will make sure we have the right square footage to make sure that that is, the goal is, if that house that exists today is deemed to be 1,200 square feet, the new house is 1,200 square feet. The idea is it is not increasing non-conformity. I think that's an important, whatever that final number ends up being, next month we can make sure it's whatever that correct number is. And that's why, I'm looking for kind of a sketch plan to get your thoughts on stuff.
Paul, I believe the fundamental fact here is that it has to be 100 feet back, is that correct?
I would. Is that what the
Well,
question is?
it's, I mean, that's the standard, but it's more complicated than that, of course.
Sure.
In that, as I mentioned, the first step in this process is to determine if the footprint of the existing structure can be moved to meet the 100-foot setback. And if it can, then we're done. That is it's been moved to the greatest practical extent. And if it is built to meet the 100-foot setback and all the other setbacks, it's no longer non-conforming. And, you wouldn't need to come to the planning board.
Yeah, and we could make it taller, and we could put 5 bedrooms.
Well,
in.
to an extent.
To an extent, no, but you can do, there's things you can do that you can't do.
That's the
Yeah.
applicant's choice as a.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. Oh, yeah.
The argument that I hear is like, give us the deviations from the land use ordinance, or we're gonna build a McMansion.
No, again, I'm not, when Scott and Dawn, when it got denied before, they came to me and said, John, what do you think? You do this stuff, can you help us out? And I said, I agree with your denial letter. I think legally that's the letter you have to write. I don't think there was anything wrong with that. I think a lot of the questions that came from the board during the review process were fair questions. They should have been there. Were they completely addressed? I think if I was a board member, I'd probably vote against the project too. And it's not a this way or the highway. However, if this was a vacant lot, this would be a vastly different conversation. And when I look at, sites that have been approved by this board that were vacant lots, it's 100 feet of the highway. I mean, that's it. And I totally agree with that. However, they do have a house that's 14 feet from the lake. In some ways, it gives them credit, but it doesn't mean they can go build whatever they want. It means it has to meet your code. It has to meet side yard setbacks, rear yard setbacks, phosphorus calculations, stormwater, has to meet all of that. One of the biggest hoops to jump through or to figure out here together, and I don't think this is something I can figure out solely. I think I kind of want some input from you guys on where this goes, because I do think Plan B is the best plan. I think it's the minimum impact. And quite honestly, it's not a normal height house. It's the same height as what's there now, which is a funny little, why? Because we're trying to keep all the conformities there. Would it be nice to build it a little taller? Absolutely it would. But you know what? We're not doing that. We get to one tough thing, and really it's 4E. And I know, listening to the minutes for this project and other projects that have gone on, that's a tough thing to balance and figure out what it is. And it kind of, to be honest, I think the state legislature ought to get together and figure out a better definition, or at least, some clearer stuff from you guys. And, if I could, I can go through, you guys know it, but I kind of went through these by myself to try to figure out how would I answer that if I, how do you justify it to you guys? And again, it's what is the greatest extent practical extent?
Well, we don't even know if that applies because we still don't know the answer to the first question.
Right.
So I think
Right.
we should get more facts.
Which is the square footage.
Well,
The first
practical
issue
extent applies
is,
to whether it can move back.
will the existing structure, could that be relocated, given its footprint?
Yeah.
Behind the 100-foot setback, could it meet that setback? And if it can, then that really is the answer to the question. Then you'll,
Doesn't.
Well, I mean, the question is a little more complicated, isn't it? Could you take the same footprint, a structure, same footprint beyond 100 feet from the water without violating some other setbacks?
well, yeah, there's that, there's
Okay.
that as well, yeah.
Because clearly, yes, they could go 100, but then there may be other issues.
And the other complication is I was looking at plans and so forth, initially, when this came to us, I was puzzling over this at first, and then I figured out that the plan that had been presented to us a few years ago assumed that the road was going to be relocated.
That's.
And so-
That's my,
So the setback distances are different if the road is relocated. And it was still an open question in my mind, did they ever do that or not? Because the current plan seems to indicate that the road is in its old location.
Yeah.
That it
They
was
were
never
willing to
moved.
relocate the road as an additional expense to make that a project work. So if the project was denied, so there's no need to move the road. So that was a concession they were trying to make, to relocate the road to town to allow that to work.
So the road is still in its
It's
original
still its
location,
original
and there's
place.
no plan to relocate it at this point, is that correct?
Not with the current plan that you guys have. Again, I think if this was a new empty site, I think, I probably wouldn't be talking about any of this with you guys tonight. It would have to be a different plan.
Sorry, just one question. So with the yes or no move behind the 100-foot mark, doesn't the practical extent apply to that consideration? Or is that no? I guess that's a question. With that practical extent of moving back behind the front, so it's Just want to do there.
Yes. So you start with,
We went through this before, though. Looking at the
Yeah.
findings
Yeah.
of fact.
Yeah.
It was determined, in fact.
Yeah.
That the existing structure, the 2100,
Yeah,
whatever,
it is, let's assume it's 2100, we'll get
it's
you the
agreed
exact.
to, by the
Yeah.
way. That it could be reconstructed to meet all required setbacks beyond the 100 foot.
Yeah.
That's
except
from the-
that, and one thing I discovered when I was looking at this stuff was that, I have a question about the road setback now, because that plan that we made those determinations on made the assumption that the road had been
It
relocated,
did, I remember,
and that made the building envelope larger.
yeah, I do remember.
And if it's not that way, that building envelope shrinks a little bit, and I don't know if it would meet the road setback or not.
And I think the current map that Justin and his team put together kind of shows you where this triangular area is that we could build it. And as you said, it's not this nice, flat, level, cleared rectangular lot, it's definitely not that. I think that's where it comes, and as we try to get the square peg to fit, we look at non-conforming structures, and, that's what they currently have. What can they do with it? They can relocate it, they can reconstruct it or replace it. As I read both of those, I guess I'm thinking, and I know Chip and I talked a little bit about this, is this a relocation, or would that only be if it was the original house picked up and put down?
Yeah, I mean, this is a
So
reconstruction.
just to make sure we're, in that scenario, I know that came up on some other applications that you reviewed.
That other one. is
Yeah,
different from this.
And I get this is a different thing, I just, it's interesting reading that in the code. And I guess when you do read that, it says, reconstruction, replace structure, shall not be any larger than the original structure, which is what we're attempting to do. Except allowed under paragraph 4G. And then it does go into, earlier in that paragraph, such reconstruction or replacement is in compliance with all requirements of the ordinance to the greatest extent practical, as determined by the planning board in accordance with paragraph 4E. Okay, I think that's kind of where this project is. Is it or is it not? And I think that's gonna take a little bit of time to work out. And, you guys probably know 4E better than I ever will. And it's an odd thing, and I kind of, is a request, is this a variance request to be forward of that 100 foot? No, it's not a variance. And the board has the authority to do it, and not only does the board have the authority to do it, but the code encourages people to move back.
I mean, land use law and ordinances in general, don't favor non-conforming structures, the whole goal
Clearly,
of the law
Yes.
and rules and so forth is to make structures conform, not
Yes.
allow the continuation of non-conforming structures.
especially on new construction.
Well, maybe especially, but also
Yeah.
existing
Right.
non-conformities.
And then your code provides a avenue that someone in the Morash's situation could pursue.
And
And
let me just summarize so that we're on the same page with this. The first step would be to determine if the same size as the existing structure could be located beyond the 100-foot setback. And, the answer to that is yes or no. If it couldn't be for some reason, I mean, if there's a 100-foot ledge and there's no way it could be moved, then you go to the greatest practical extent. The planning board would then look at the same size structure and where could that be moved to meet the setback requirements to the greatest practical extent.
yes,
Um,
and it has, it has a test for that,
yes,
and it's a test. I almost wish it was spelled out A, B, C, D, but it's in a paragraph form.
And
And I
then,
think,
one more piece, and I just want to make sure this is out on the table. You know, if we made the determination that in this case, it couldn't be moved back 100 feet, and we haven't determined
no,
that
no,
yet.
no,
But if we said, oh, no, we agree, it can only be moved, you know, X feet, and this is where it would go to meet setback requirements to the greatest practical extent, then you start looking at those expansion requirements.
yes,
And there are some pretty serious limitations on size
Yeah.
when you get there.
Yeah.
So,
and I think if this was a vacant lot and they were proposing new construction, new build. You know, when we read through your code of reconstruction, you know, when we look at section 4B, that wouldn't be an option for the Morashes. This was a vacant lot. I think that's an important consideration, you know, is it a vacant lot? Is it, no, it's not. And then that's where we come under, you know.
yeah, so I mean, this whole
reconstruction.
thing, non-conforming structures is not about vacant lots, it's about existing structures.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, and under that, you know, again, back to this is your code, we're trying to work through the if-thens of this code. You know, reconstruction, you know, can you go back 100 feet? Yes, but the board shall consider, you know, this greatest extent, you know, practical part of the code. And I think when we look at that, that's where, that's kind of, to me, a pretty important discussion.
Well, one of the things that I think went awry the first time around.
And again, I wasn't part of any of that,
Yeah.
so
But there was a lot of.
don't crucify me for any of that.
No,
you
no,
know,
I
so-
just,
Come
I
over
don't
and just
want
kinda
us to
try to
go
help
in that
figure
same
something
direction again, that's all. You know, I do believe, and I think the decision and the written material bears this out, but, as I recall, the Morashes, their understanding was that we needed to look at the greatest practical extent determination for the building that they were proposing. So what they were saying essentially was, we've got this 4,600 square foot house, and the board should be looking at positioning that house to meet setbacks to the greatest practical extent. That's not what the ordinance says.
That's not what I'm not here
Okay.
I think
I'm not here to defend that or encourage it or anything, you know what I mean, I understand, again, I was not part of any of that.
Yeah,
I
no,
came into this
I
process
get that.
after.
Yeah.
Again, I live 7 hours away, you know, I was over at Scott's a couple summers ago, hey, can you look at this, what do you think? You know, my first response was, why don't you go with plan A, just fix up the house you got, you know what I mean, so. But, you know, trying to figure that out, but as I go through the code, I understand where you're coming from. The problem, as you pointed out in the denial letter, was that what they had proposed, one, it didn't meet the setbacks, but more importantly, it was increasing non-conformity. You know, so it failed on two reasons. You know, increasing non-conformity, it's all throughout your code. You can't do that. You can't increase the height and make it more non-conforming. And I think that's why when I worked with Justin on this particular design, how do I reduce or eliminate any non-conformity? Height, size, square footage, number of bedrooms, you know, let's get rid of all.
Yeah.
Except for
And,
one.
is the purpose of this meeting is to determine completeness of the package, isn't it? Maybe not to spitball ideas and figure out what we can do, what we can't do.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Let
certainly,
me just ask the question, I think the request is to take a 2,400 square foot structure that's non-conforming and move it 75 feet back, which would still make it non-conforming. Although I can't tell by the plan if it's a 2,100 square foot plan that they're proposing or not, it appears bigger than that. So, I mean, just based upon that, I would say that the package is incomplete. And we could rule on it now and say, come back with a complete plan, tell us what you wanna do, and then we can make a ruling after that.
Just to be clear on the square footage thing that keeps coming up, if the house that exists today is 2,100 square feet, the new house will be,
But that should be
21.
known before it comes to the
Right.
plan.
That's exactly correct.
Yeah.
We need, if the intent of the applicant is not to expand,
yes,
which, but rather just to create to maintain a structure of the same size as the current structure, just have a different location. If that's the intent, we need to have enough information in the application to at least agree on that premise, that that's what's happening, and then we can look at how the ordinance fits. But right now, we don't seem to have, it was currently before us, isn't clear as to the proposed size of the new structure.
You know, I'm not the architect, he is, I'm gonna have him address where on that plan the square footage is. With you.
Yeah, no,
So,
sorry.
you know, because that way, I mean, again, we're here,
You know, just one more thing about your, you know, plans A, B, and C and.
I just want you to know how I got to
Spitball
where,
thing.
why I got to where this is, you know.
You know, I think some of the discussion we've had, I hope is helpful to you.
It's very important.
Because, you know, I think that it's helped the board, you know, kind of focus on what the issues are with this application, if we do in fact get one for something specific. But it's very difficult, I mean, we wouldn't be able to walk away tonight and say, well, you know, we think that Plan B has the most promise. We can't make that kind of.
I'm not asking you to do that, I'm explaining, and the only reason there's one application in front of you is that I don't want to confuse it, I want you to understand why I've gotten to where I've gotten. However, in the future, we may decide as a group that, you know what, Plan B just doesn't cut it, guys. You know what, I come back with Plan A, which is I'm fixing a house, you know, but that would be some, maybe I have to come back to this board. I just kind of wanted you guys to understand that there was a reason this plan got put together, and I'll finish why that is. But I think we need to have Justin address in no uncertain terms whether this is a 2,100 square foot house, a 1,800 square foot house, a 10,000 square, whatever the number is. Why don't you clear that up for them, and then I think we can move on and get you guys home for dinner. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, it's not gonna be the answer you want there. It's, we're showing 1528 for existing, and then with the basement, so unless we did a shorter height foundation.
You're talking about the existing house or the proposed?
The existing,
The existing, I don't know, the town record is 2084.
Yeah,
okay, on our calculation.
but
Yeah.
looking at you did this detailed inventory of the square footage of all the rooms and so forth, and that updated information indicates that, you know, my number was 1553 on one sheet, and then on another sheet it was 1745.
Okay.
So there's that discrepancy, but they were both, like, yeah, floor area.
Yeah.
But they're both less than the 2,000 for whatever reason. I don't know why that
And in the
is.
previous record, it was recorded as 2,100, right?
Right,
So I mean, it's
Right.
like the footprint of the existing structure.
Yeah, I'm not gonna answer that right now, just because that I saw it's incorrect, so I don't know that.
and, you know, and when you're looking at this, you know, it's A101 and A100,
Yep.
and there's two different answers to that
No, we'll
question in
get
this
you,
package.
yes, for the next meeting, we'll get you one page.
There's also, between the original application and this one, the difference in the
I'm sorry.
depth of the lot.
So what is that?
There's a difference in the depth of the lot. In the original application, it was,
I mean, it's a survey, I think, like I said, the only thing we moved was the road, trying to show that they were willing to incur some expense to make that happen. It's a survey from the state surveyor, so.
so there were two different surveys done between.
No, we have a survey, and just using this one, and on the other site plan, we had showed the road moving to facilitate the larger building.
And so that
This is a
changed the
site
size
survey.
of the lot? Did they acquire
No,
more
absolutely not.
property as a
No,
result of
There's two
that?
different lot sizes, so.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, what would be
One
based
is
off the
like
survey?
118 and one is 145, the same lot.
And I could address that. The neighbors, that abut their property, there's like a little sliver that paralleled the existing road that's still there. And what they did, just to clean up, you know, the property line, if you will, the Morashes bought this little sliver of land, and so a few feet that paralleled the road. So that's why that triangle got a little bit longer on the hypotenuse, if you will, by adding that little bit to it.
So there's two deeds in this application, like one, I think, for their house, and then maybe one for the addition.
Yes.
I thought I saw two deeds in there.
That would be correct, and that was recent, you know, that was kind of part of what was going on before. You know, so, you know, I'll just kind of jump in there. for discussion's sake for tonight, we obviously have to clear up exactly, Justin, would you be able to put like a sheet together that shows existing footprints, here's how many square feet, and this is,
Yeah, I thought we did, there's just.
Oh, okay, just that.
And
I
also,
like pictures, because it kind of.
yeah, as I mentioned before, I've got the same problem with the proposed structure. I've got one sheet that indicates 26, 23, and another sheet that indicates 29, 46.
Sure, no, we definitely
So-
solidified that the calculations are incorrect.
Yeah, so that will be cleared up, Mike, to make sure we're good there. Again, the goal with this is that if it's 1,801 square feet, it's gonna be 1,800 square feet for the new one, whatever those numbers are, not large, cannot be larger. The reason that there is the basement calculation included in that is in the code, it provided, structures located, and this is in 3C2. And the reason that it's in there, and again, maybe the board doesn't like it, but, if a new foundation includes a basement, the structure is located at least 50 feet from the high water mark of the water body, then the foundation shall not be considered an expansion of the floor area of the structure.
That section you're quoting from is a piece that talks about, an enlarged or replacement foundation beneath an existing structure, and that's not what's happening here.
Oh, okay. It's
So
under non-
that's what that's relevant to, not in general. In general, if the basement is at least 6 feet high, it's calculated into the size of the structure.
Okay, perfect, thank you for that, yeah, and again, that's what I'm hoping to get out of this meeting tonight, I apologize, I didn't, Lake George's codes, I've spent 25 years with them, I kind of unfortunately have them memorized, but, that's the stuff that helps me, so when we do come back, modify the foundation, so there's no confusion there, and then get the square footage calculations. I also, knowing that the greatest extent practical test is really a pretty critical thing, and not to waste this board's time, but if we can't get past that test to a satisfactory level, the more we need to look at what they're gonna do next, that's kind of, where do we keep going with this? You know what I mean? Things always come to some conclusion, so, and that's kind of why I'm spelling out different things. I'm not trying to say, the Moorashes may come back and say, 100 feet's fine with us. Or they may come back and say, we're happy to live where we live and never talk to a planning board for the rest of their lives. You know what I mean? I'm trying to kind of feel out where this would go. In other words, you guys could go 100 different ways, and I could come back with a lot of different things. But I think that greatest extent test is pretty critical in this. And, and I've kind of worked through why is this possible using that provision? And we look, it's not limited to the size of the lot, it's a half-acre lot, it's not big. It's also a triangular lot, so the further back from the lake we go, we're going to the narrower part of the lot. We can, utilize provisions in the code to allow for, changes in setbacks, moving roads. A lot of these things have been, done, and allowed, the slope of the land. We're talking about moving the house back to the steepest part of the lot and putting a driveway in on a pretty steep, and those of you that remember the old plan, that driveway came off a really steep section of road onto a very steep driveway. I just don't, I think that's not good. Greatest extent practical test, the height of the building. What we're proposing here is no change to the height of the building. I think that's important. Potential for soil erosion, clearing, old growth forests and putting, development on steeper slopes. That's just not good development,
Excuse me just a minute.
All this is speculation, but I had a question for Chip. In the packet, I didn't see the answers to the planning board review criteria questionnaire. Questions are there, but I didn't see the answers.
I believe much of that was on one of these A sheets. A09.
approach the board. Copy if you like. Where's he at it?
He's probably got it.
I got it.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I have it.
Is it what you were looking for, John?
Yeah. I think so.
It doesn't really address the,
What sheet is it? A09?
Yeah, I think just have the enlarged version of it here.
So this is a list of the factors involved in the greatest practical extent determination.
It's not the.
Yeah, it's not what you're talking about. Yeah, so Jack is talking about there's the application packet that Chip at some point had given you. There's a list of general site review questions on those sheets. And that's what, I think Jack is speaking to, that
It was submitted as part of the application.
it was.
It was submitted as part of the application,
Any answers?
yes.
So where is that?
I don't know, the application from,
The original pack right here.
oh, yeah.
Page 4. Yeah, with page 4, that's the questions, but I don't see the answers. That's the issue.
There's 22 questions.
We don't,
We got some homework.
we don't have to, to answer all those now if they weren't
No,
responded to, but it's so,
But it should be in
it's a
there.
legitimate question and it's something
gotta be
that
in
would
the
need to be
application.
addressed if in fact you submit a complete application.
Yep.
Is there anything else that we need for completeness
Um,
that they should be aware of?
there's the checklist. The other things I had on my list were principally the discrepancies, the dimensional things. One other issue, on the plans is that one of them indicated, we've been talking consistently about the existing structure being 14 feet from the lake.
Yeah.
Which is, an important point. One of those plans indicates it's 21 feet, and I don't know why. But that's another discrepancy that I saw.
Yeah, and this morning I actually measured it from the outside of the deck to the closest kind of point on the water. It was 14 feet. It may be the 21 might be the actual wall of the house, not the actual deck of the house. That would be my suspicion. And do you know where that 21 feet was? And I will make sure we,
It's
make a note
on
on the
sheet A100.
There's from the deck.
okay, so I think it might be the difference between 14's from the deck and the wall of the house was 21. So we'll clarify.
Oh, okay.
And again, this is why, to keep working through this is, and again, as we go through this test, it's in your code, location of any existing easements. Power line company unfortunately has an easement right down the middle of this. Can it be moved? Yeah, it can. It's one more hurdle that has to be.
Yeah, and I assume that, in the earlier proposal, the power line was there at that point, right? And it went right through the house. As I recall from the plan, so the plan was to move it,
Yeah.
I assume.
And I will say, when it comes to what's possible, we can move the lake if we had to. Is that practical? When do all of these little things add up to it not being practical? And I think that's, these are not, these things are taken together.
I think you'll need to figure out how to move the light.
Corps engineers, they can do some pretty amazing things.
Yeah.
You
Unfortunately,
need a permit for that.
yeah, you need a permit from not just you guys, but probably a lot of other ones. Oh, yeah, the town of Lake George actually wanted to fill in the lake and then build a park And to say the least, that got shut down in about 4 seconds, so, so we dealt with that a bit. And, you know, the type and amount of vegetation to be removed to accomplish the relocation. My goal with this is low impact development, it's not to remove any vegetation, it's anything to add vegetation and to add stormwater. You know, in the last sentence, further, the planning board shall determine that such relocation, reconstruction, replacement, or foundation construction does not cause an increase in non-conformity. And I think that's a key thing.
It is a key thing, and I
Yes.
wanna make sure it's understood what that means.
Yeah.
There's a definition of what increase in nonconformity means, and in this particular case, it means getting closer to the lake. Because the nonconformity, the biggest nonconformity that exists currently with this structure is that it's 14 feet from the lake.
Yes,
And so this is saying, under no circumstance can you get closer than 14 feet to the
or go
lake.
taller, or go bigger.
Well,
or-
no, the bigger and all that is
Yeah.
a different section.
Yeah.
Making, you know, proposing a larger structure wouldn't constitute an increase in nonconformity. Because the size of the structure is not where the nonconformity lies currently.
Right.
It's the distance to the lake, if that makes any sense.
Oh, no, I understand. So, you know, again, just for discussion's sake, plan C, if it's 100 feet back and it's 8,000 square feet, well, it's 8,000 square feet. Yeah, you know, that's not a non-conformity. But if you're gonna be doing anything other than 100 feet, it can't be more non-conforming in any capacity, whether it's height or square footage or whatever.
Well, square footage is a different issue. It relates to different sections.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's an increase in nonconformity.
So I can, so their house.
There are certain circumstances under which the house could be bigger, but they're laid out in detail here.
Okay, bigger and with less than 100 feet.
It's hard to talk about because I don't know what the number is, you know, in terms of how big is this existing structure actually. In all practical reality, I think that the house, if it's less than 100, cannot be under any circumstance bigger than 1,500, but that doesn't come in Florida. That doesn't come from being a nonconformity. It comes from section 4G. And that talks about expansions. So, I mean, it's complicated, but I just want to make sure that, you know, that you understand.
Yeah, because one of the things that I did look at was take the existing structure and can you put an addition on the back or whatever, you know, what can you do there? You know what I mean? So I understand that.
Yeah.
And I think that's why what, you know, I'm looking at proposing is to not increase that square footage, not increase the height, not increase anything. And really the more ashes, they're not gaining anything other than better insulation, to be honest with you. They're 50 feet back instead of 14. But it does gain a lot for this parcel and solidifying that house that's there. Or the house that we're proposing. It's just better development. You know, there's stormwater, there's new septic, there's a lot of benefits. The code doesn't, you know, it's not like a, you know, hey, if you put a new septic in, you can put your house here. I understand your code doesn't work that, but I think it is, you know, important to consider that, and it does address that as part of the test. You know, to consider the septic, to consider, you know, all these factors that are considered in this plan that you have before you tonight. Each one of these aspects of this test were considered in this plan. I'm not sure if there's any questions or anything on that, because I think this is a hinge point on, you know, how this process moves forward, and maybe there's information you need to help you guys decide if this meets that test or not.
I think the question is the package complete or not?
No, it's not complete.
So.
It'll be much more complete next month.
No, I agree. I don't believe it's complete. I mean, we don't have a complete package in front of us that we could move forward with.
Yeah.
And please keep in mind, when you're considering this, when you go back, that if there's going to be a reconstruction of an existing structure, the ordinance requires that that greatest practical extent test means exactly that. That has to be located as far back as possible to meet the setback. And so, if 50 feet, if you go further than 50 feet, then that's what the planning board will need to find, that, 50 feet isn't enough. And those factors that you're talking about are the things generally that we would look at in determining if it's been moved back the greatest extent possible.
Yeah.
Practically.
Yeah, and when I look at it, the moving roads, moving power lines, clearing on steep slopes, clearing old growth forest, at some point, when does this not become practical? You know what I mean, one at
Yeah,
a
well,
time,
that's
If
something
it-
to look at when we have.
that's
the
something you guys
numbers,
have to look at, yeah. But when I look at that as a sum, it's pretty destructive to try to meet that.
But, I mean, it seemed to be the plan of choice when the plan came before us initially. I mean, that's what it was.
Because it sucks.
Well,
Yeah.
it came
Yeah.
before us as a 4,600 square foot house, and it still didn't meet 100-foot setback.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
And that included moving roads, clearing forests, and I mean, that is not low income or low impact development.
Well, should we take that up in the next meeting? when we
Yeah.
have to do that?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of tonight is, hey, here's
So
kind of
should we
where
do a motion and just-
we have a list of homework.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there
Is
anything
there-
else?
I think I have all my questions out. Is there anything else anyone wants to ask before we wrap this up? Do
By
you
the way-
have what you need from us?
I think so, and I think, you guys can, part of this process is to understand how I got to where I am, and why it's here. The Moorashes do have the right to just live where they live and put a coat of paint on the place and call it a day. And, not improve the site, not do much of anything. And there are plenty of those on the lake, and I think the code's trying to encourage people to make lots more conforming. And I think that's a pretty important thing, and, it may not be perfect, and I think you guys even took steps in the last code revision to try to encourage people to move houses back and give some leeway in side yard setbacks, and if merging those numbers, which I think is smart development. And I guess I looked at it, so if I'm gonna be getting relief on this side yard, well, I gotta cut a bunch of trees down and get that, why not just keep it, right in that little area that's already cleared? And there's no bulldozers, no clearing, I mean, I think to be honest with you, if somebody drove by on the lake, they probably wouldn't notice anything changed. I think that's, to me personally, that's good development. How do we get there? I think that's, next month's meeting.
Yeah, that's to be determined.
Yeah, it's not, and I, to be honest, I feel for you guys, because it's not a clear, it's not that clear, it's very vague, and it's not been interpreted the same. When you look at different municipalities around the state, it's being interpreted differently, and it's very,
Probably true.
I hate to say that, and not always for good, I mean, and I think it's kind of,
But we're here.
you're here,
And we have a clear ordinance,
Yep.
and we do
Yeah.
have some precedent because we've looked at quite a few of these.
Yeah, the lots that, the parcels that you guys have worked with, I mean, there's Fisk and Weaver and a bunch of these, that have come up in the last couple of years. I've reviewed those and, hey, okay, well, why did they do that? Why did they do that? Okay, and are they good projects? I think when they get done, some of them are good projects, and I think, it shows that you guys are working with people. I think that's kind of a key.
Well, thank you very much for all that.
It's been
It
great
was-
to come
it
over
was-
here in the
it was
winter,
helpful.
it's way more fun in the summer, I have to say, but, the lake's a lot quieter in the winter, and, but no, thank you guys, and thank you for, the considerations that the time you put in on our last application.
Dana, did you have a motion you wanted to?
Do you want me, I can make a motion, I move that we find the package incomplete. It's that simple.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion? All those in favor?
How about a resolution to adjourn? The best
Aye,
resolution.
aye.
Aye, John is an aye. Okay. All right, again, what? No, Falls and Airport, no dates.
Yeah.
So we'll look forward to additional information.
but we will need it 2 weeks before.
Yeah, yeah, to do so.
Yeah. Okay,
That's his job.
so again, thank you very much.
No, thank you,
We
guys, and,
appreciate it.
appreciate you coming out, thanks for, you know, it was only one application for tonight, I think it's an important first step to look at stuff, so. Well, thank you, guys, so, appreciate that.
Thank you.
Safe trip back to
I
George.
said it's more fun when you're in the summer, but it's kind of cool to come in the winter, so, take care, you guys.
Good night. We have minutes. The 28th. I have no revisions. Anyone have revisions? If not, is there a motion? Motion second, discussion. All those in favor?
Stay.
John?
Aye.
What?
He was out.
Oh, he was absent. John, you were absent. Are you an abstention
Oh,
or
sorry.
not?
Abstention. Yeah, I wasn't there at the last meeting.
Okay, so, I think that is it, and,
That's the question.
sure,
Completely unrelated. In the last minutes, talk about the December 9th meeting.
yeah.
Is that a good meeting to talk about proposed LUO revisions?
Well-
In that process
Possibly,
or not?
what does it look like? I mean, people's schedules on the 9th. Is everyone around?
I might be on Zoom, or I might get here.
You might,
I'm not around that night,
you're not here on the 9th.
but I can see the.
Yeah, anybody else?
I'll be here.
Okay.
Okay.
I can be here.
You don't have anything else queued up at this point, correct? Okay. Okay. Well, why don't we confirm it up. It might be an opportunity to start some of that procedural stuff.
It's the housing stuff that shifts in around, it's the state proposing ordinance changes or. You know,
It's past, not proposing.
There's legislation. I haven't looked at it carefully yet. I was gonna take another look at it.
There were 3 pieces,
Um,
all have been passed, and they just start at different times. It's actually one piece that started earlier this year. The other
But
one is the
in
next
terms of revisions that we might need to make, I don't think they would kick in for us until 2027.
one, 6 months.
Because it talked about, select board, town manager, select board, government. I think that was the 2027 date. And if your city council was 26, something like that, but I'll look at that again too. Did you have, specific revisions in mind, Henry? Are you looking at solar?
You asked me to look, the board asked me to look at the solar ordinance again, just to see if there's anything we wanted to tweak to it. And the answer is yes, there are some proposed edits that I will offer that are trying to update it to be more consistent with what's going on. And also, based upon our recent experiences, we were going to consider proposing a construction farm situation.
Yeah.
For the large scale ground mounted solar programs only.
Yeah.
Therefore guaranteeing the town gets what it permits. So I found some good language to propose for that is in current ordinance and law in other jurisdictions, and we can look at that and see. It's pretty straightforward.
There's some language in the existing area of performance guarantees.
Yes, we do have some of our own language, but there's also specific language to
Specific to the solar.
programs, because it's only limited to the construction period. So
So, you know, for everybody, I guess, you can think about if there are other things that we have come across, you know, over the past year that have struck you as being items for revision in the LUL. Think about what those might be, and we can, you know, you can bring those forward. I've got a couple of things that I noted, I don't have them with me, but nothing major, but I think there were a couple of little things that came up that we agreed.
So list of the comprehensive plan stuff that we were supposed to be doing.
Yeah, there is the comp plan stuff. I mean, that's a whole discussion on its own. Dana had done an initial look at that back a while.
I saw a huge draft of that, of everything that we could respond to, I mean, wouldn't knock a couple of those out.
That's,
We're looking at it.
Yeah.
yeah, we definitely need to look at
And
it.
so all those changes in the law, I mean, is that something that we would do, or we just hand that off to an attorney and have them update it? It's
We
basically
used
stuff.
used a consultancy last time, and I assume they do it again,
Yeah,
and there's something in there that provides funding for doing that, so.
okay.
You know, if it even requires that, you know, I'm not sure what the changes
I
are.
mean, it looks like building more houses on fewer lots,
Mhm.
stuffing more houses on the same size lot.
Okay, well, why don't we reserve judgment on what the agenda would look like for the 9th? And can send something out.
There's nothing else in the works for the night at this point.
Are we on approximately monthly schedule?
Monthly,
In December,
Yes, still
We
every.
said for November, so we would just want to.
Bylaws too.
there's the bylaws as well, and I haven't sent those around yet. I've been fooling around with them a bit. I looked at a few more municipalities and so potentially we could do that.
It can never be perfect. So-
No, they cannot.
It's not a document.
No, what I did most recently, there was some procedural stuff in there that I pulled out because a lot of the procedures are governed in large part by language in the ordinance. And I don't think that if it's addressed in the ordinance, I don't think it belongs in bylaws. So anyway, I started extricating all that.
When were they last written or revised?
Oh, it was, well, on the website, there's like a 1989 version on the website, but that's not the most recent. I forget the date, they're old, but that's not the most recent. I don't know why that one's up there, but it is.
Paula,
John,
do we have a meeting next week?
no, there's no meeting next week. No, tonight was our one meeting for November. And December 9th is the one meeting that potentially we'll have in December.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, we're adjourned.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Hi, John.
Yeah, John.
Night.